Chapter 5 is on the executive branch. Remember, the executive branch is in Article 2 of the United States Constitution, so it might not be a bad idea to just take a look at that part of the Constitution in your foundational documents. The chapter begins by talking about, briefly at least, the process of the Electoral College and how electors work. We'll get into this a lot more later within the semester, but basically understand the Electoral College was created because the Founding Fathers distrusted democracy, and some of the smaller states were afraid that if it was just a popular vote, the big states could kind of get anybody they wanted to in the White House and that they would be weaker. So it was almost a byproduct of federalism in part also. The one simple thing to remember right now about the Electoral College is each state gets the same number of votes in the Electoral College that is equal to the 2 senators they have plus their House reps. In Article 2, you'll see the requirements to be president of the United States. There are really basically 3 requirements. You've got to be at least 35 years old. You've got to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. And the third requirement is you must have lived in the United States for at least 14 years as a resident. Once elected president, you will serve a 4-year term. George Washington served twice and said that's enough. That's as much as anybody should serve. And that lasted until FDR, until he was elected 4 times in the 1930s and 40s. Because of that, after FDR was president, they passed the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution, which is another presidential amendment you should know. In that amendment, they said you cannot serve more than 2 terms or 10 full years. Breaking down the executive branch through our required documents. The one document you'll have to take a look at is Fed 70, Federalist Essay number 70, was written by Alexander Hamilton. We'll talk about it in class, but just a couple of the main ideas. Hamilton was trying to convince us why there should be just a single executive. Some people are arguing for a plural executive, more than one president. He said that the executive needs to be energetic, that the executive is going to help secure the liberties of the country, and that if you have a single executive, a couple things come out of this. One, you get an individual who is much more accountable to the people, because there is no one else to blame. If you have a plural executive, they'll always be passing the buck from one to the other. The second element he thought was with a single executive, you'll be able to make those quick decisions that sometimes are required of an executive officer, and one individual will make those things happen much quicker and will be better for the country. The Constitution outlines some some enumerated or some formal powers, some things that the president specifically has the power to do, but the article itself is much shorter than Article 1 and the definitions for Congress. So we also recognize there are a lot of informal powers, things the presidents have done throughout the years that have just kind of grown, or are their ways, kind of like the Elastic Clause, to expand upon the formal powers that were given to them through Article 2 in the U.S. Constitution. Many of those powers are executed through different hats that presidents wear. And so if you hear the phrase a presidential hat, think about different roles the president performs. And so some of his powers are performed, or many of them, through these different hats. The first hat the president wears really is as chief executive. And as a formal power, it says in the Article 2 that the chief executive responsibility of the president is to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed. Again, there's not a ton of definition in there, so that leads to a lot of informal powers in regards to how those powers or those laws are exactly executed, how they're prioritized, and what role the president has in that. As executive, what he does a lot of times also is he hires people. Some of those people that he hires that are close to him are those individuals in his cabinet department, which includes 15 executive departments, and oftentimes some other people might be part of cabinet department meetings, like the vice president and other officers that the president feels are close to him. If you were going to get appointed to one of these executive departments, not only do you need the president to choose you, but you need the Senate to confirm your appointment. The next hat the president wears is that chief diplomat. Diplomat refers to his role in guiding America's foreign relations and powers with us dealing with other countries overseas and across our borders. Some of the formal powers he has is the power to make treaties and appoint ambassadors. Again, one of the benefits, like Hamilton pointed out, by having a single individual, it allows for quicker and more decisive actions in these foreign relations, which sometimes are very beneficial for the country. The next hat the president puts on is as chief legislator. As chief legislator, he's got responsibilities in regards to the lawmaking process itself. one of the formal responsibilities that he's given in the Constitution is he must from time to time give a State of the Union, all right? So once a year is what is customary. The president will address Congress. They haven't always addressed them personally. They've written letters in the past, but really since Jimmy Carter, all right, presidents have been addressing Congress on an annual basis. It's their job as chief legislator to set an agenda, to set a course for the nation, to suggest the kind of things that have been going well, the things that we need to do in the future, and that helps guide Congress, or is supposed to help guide Congress on where they should go. Of course, as chief legislator, the president has the power to veto and pocket veto, but we talked about that in Chapter 4. One of the significant hats the president wears from the Constitution is his power as commander-in-chief. He's in charge of the armed services. He can determine where the military goes, when they are sent out. He's in charge of the nuclear football. All right, so if the president needs to launch some nuclear weapons, all right, the nuclear football is never too far from him, and so he can enter the codes, and boom, we can blow up the world. All right, that's his power as commander-in-chief. Always remember with that, though, Congress still possesses the power to declare war. So the president's in charge of the military, but Congress has the power to declare war. An additional power he has away from the military is that of some judicial powers. The president has the power to both pardon and reprieve granted to him from the Constitution. Pardon means he has the power to forgive people for crimes that they have been convicted of, as long as they're not impeachment charges. And he has the power to grant reprieves, which means to postpone punishments, perhaps to allow the courts to look at something a little bit further before they go forward. One of the last kind of conversations they talk about are some of these unilateral powers that the president seems to have. And what they mean by unilateral, that he has powers that seemingly he can use that are not really checked in the same way some of his other authorities are. Some of those unilateral powers are the presidents, and Trump has been doing this a significant amount, presidents can claim executive privilege. With that, they can withhold information or try to justify withholding information from Congress and from others, things that are connected with their department, with the White House itself. The president also has the unilateral power to issue executive agreements. He can issue an agreement with a foreign country that does not require the approval of the Senate. Now, it's not as binding as a treaty, and usually just these are less formal agreements than treaties are, less significant historically, but the president could stretch that power in a unilateral manner. Just like he can stretch the power through executive orders. Executive orders are really the power of the president to almost decree laws himself without Congress's intervention. Most of the time when the president issues executive orders, they're for insignificant things like declaring a national holiday, creating a park, a national park. There have been some extraordinarily significant executive orders. Executive Order 9066 by FDR put individuals of Japanese ancestry into internment camps during World War II. So really, this could go very far, and it's one of those things that scares people that are concerned about an excessively powerful executive. The last thing, just kind of as a reminder, the president's also the power to issue signing statements as the chief legislator. So with a bill, even though they sign it into law, they can release a statement that tries to express some of their doubts with the law, and it gives them a little bit of political cover and tries to make a statement to the country on what they truly believe is the best course in regards to that specific issue. There are some ways the Constitution is set up to limit the powers of the president. We've gone over a lot of them. Think about the checks and balance system with the impeachment power, the power of appropriations from Congress, the reality that judges are appointed for life, so once the president puts them there, he loses control of those individuals. But a couple of the other powers that they talk about is the power of the War Powers Act. In the early 1970s, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. In it, what they've done is they've tried to limit the power of the president as commander-in-chief out of this fear that really, most of the time we're involved in military conflict, the United States is not declaring war. And so in like Vietnam's case, we could be gone overseas for 20 years and really not have the same level of control from Congress as perhaps they want. And so what the War Powers Act does is it gives the presidents two main requirements. If they use the military in some manner, they have 48 hours to let Congress know that they've used the military. Secondly, they have a 60-day limitation. They have 60 days to continue to use the military without a a vote of support, a resolution of support from Congress. If they have not gotten that within 60 days, they have to bring those troops home within the next 30 days. So the War Powers Act was meant to try to restrain the president as commander-in-chief. Another thing that restrains the president is through the courts themselves. And so in the textbook, they talk about a couple cases of judicial review, which are historically significant. Of course, there's the court case of United States versus Nixon, in which the Supreme Court has stepped up and told the president, listen, you're claiming executive privilege here with these White House tapes. You have to release them. All right, since they forced him through that ruling to release them, Richard Nixon resigned. Similarly, in the book, they talk about a court case called Omni versus Rumsfeld. And in the Rumsfeld case, the government was trying to find a way to maintain control over suspected terrorists. And the Supreme Court said that even though you believe that there are some military periods of stress here, you do not have a blank check as a federal government to do whatever you want, whenever you want, in regards to jailing people, whether it's on American soil or overseas. There could be some limitations placed there. The last thing we'll talk about is those people that are closest to the president, and they bring out a few of them. One of the ones that we think is maybe mainly closest to the president is the vice president of the United States. To be true, that really varies between one president and the next, how close the vice president is on a daily basis with the president of the United States. The vice president only has two formal jobs. He or she is there to vote in case of a tie in the Senate and to replace the president if there's some kind of vacancy. Otherwise, the vice president, in regards to the Constitution, has little to no responsibilities at all. There are two amendments, however, that deal with the vice presidency and the presidency that you should know. And that's the 12th Amendment. It's the first one. The 12th Amendment is an amendment we passed after the election of 1800, in which they decided to no longer have the person that came in second place become the vice president. They allow the members of the Electoral College to select the president and the vice president separately. So now you have a running mate, and that running mate usually helps balance the ticket for presidential candidates to help them win elections. The other amendment that helps with the vice presidency is the 25th Amendment. In the 25th Amendment, it came up with a process for the first time, a constitutional process, on how you would replace the vice president if he happens to vacate office. He's impeached and convicted. He dies. How do we do this? The 25th Amendment basically allows the president to appoint somebody that they want to replace them, and Congress can approve that replacement. The 25th Amendment also comes up with a process on having the vice president take over the role of the president if the president is unable to fulfill the duties of the job. And so that can happen if the president decides to pass off the responsibilities, him or herself. It can also happen with the vote of the vice president and a majority of the cabinet. If they agree, the VP can take over the responsibilities of the office if for some reason the president hasn't vacated the office, but he can't fulfill the duties any longer. We should know the first ladies are close to presidents, but usually the first ladies kind of live on their own in regards to their political purpose. Most first ladies choose kind of one theme that they want to try to focus upon during each four-year term. First Lady Trump, Melania, has focused upon this be best idea of trying to get rid of bullying in schools. Obama's wife was focused upon health in schools for kids. So everybody kind of picks up their own little area that they want to improve as a first lady in the country. The final group that you should think about is a group referred to as the EOP. The Executive Offices of the President is a collection of different federal agencies that assist the president on a regular basis. Some of these refer to Executive Offices of the President, some groups that are housed outside of the White House, most of them. There are three that you should know. The NSC is the National Security Council. All right, they help bring the president's military and diplomatic people together. All right, the OMB is the Office of Management and Budget. We introduced them to you in Chapter 4. They help the president develop his budget and come up with forecasts and ideas on cost of presidential budgetary items. And the other EOP office that you should know is the CEA. The Council of Economic Advisors is a group of individuals, 3 individuals the president hires to give him economic advice and help them direct the economy as best they can. One other group that's part of the executive office of the president, but is really closer to the president on a daily basis, is the is the White House staff. The White House staff or the White House office are those people that work in the West Wing themselves. Some of the titles you should recognize of people that work in the White House staff are the press secretary, the chief of staff to the president, but includes hundreds of other people that are in the West Wing that help the president with speech writing, with liaisons to Congress, and other things. So the president has lots of people surrounding him to help him with his jobs, and hopefully you pick that up in Chapter 5. We will see you soon.